Sam's got our back. Posted the YouTube link in the design.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Nice.
Sweet. All right, we are live. How's it going?
Oh my gosh. Great. How are you? We got through all the technical
Oh
difficulties.
man,
We're here.
yeah, we got over those hurdles. I'm doing well. This is exciting. Uh,
Yeah, so
I
we live on the YouTube channel now,
I believe we are live on the YouTube channel. That's what
on the tubes.
that's all systems are go uh, according to my dashboard here.
Very cool.
Ground
Do we
control.
have a direct link to it?
I think that the link in our design channel is the right one.
All right.
Just want to.
I gotta do some social mediaing on the side of the live video.
Oh
You
yeah.
know how it is.
Oh yeah. Do your thing. Yeah. According to our YouTube homepage, we are live.
Wild. Very cool.
Hello, chat. um, I am just going to count on chat telling us if there's any audio issue or video issue, but I think it looks all good.
That's great. Oh yeah, I'm in.
Hacker mode.
All right. Let me mute that one so I don't get double the feed, double the fun.
Yeah. Something that I was playing with this earlier, and something that I found was really fun was these little dots below each of the little things in the mind map. You can like drag them and connect them to other stuff.
Yeah, half the fun of this, I think, is playing around with Miro.
Yeah. This is my ulterior motive.
Yeah, absolutely.
I've actually been reading this book about debt coincidentally, but it's not about
Debt
design
in
debt.
general?
Yeah, just debt in general, like the idea and history of like the concept of debt. So it's been interesting to like think about think about all of those things and how it applies to this metaphor. I don't really think the metaphor fully stands up, but it did make me ask the question like, okay, design debt, that implies that we owe it to somebody, and who is that? The
Mm-hmm.
designer in me, of course, is immediately like the user, duh. But that's just my assumption.
No, that makes sense to me. So I wrote that blog post about design debt, and we got actually an interesting comment from one of our followers saying, I think this is actually product debt and design is the solution.
Yeah, I can see that for sure.
Yeah, it was an interesting point.
Yeah, yeah.
But I think the reason that we've been calling it out separately is because, like, as product folks, we have such a tendency to immediately think product debt and then go to tech debt.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're really trying to shine a light on the design side of things.
Yeah, yeah. I can see that totally. And I when I think about um, when I think about like product debt and how design is how you're paying that off, it seems like a much stickier situation than technical debt. And maybe I'm wrong about this, but whenever I think about technical debt, I usually think about that not really, um, aside from performance, I don't really know necessarily how strict technical debt um, impacts the user. A lot of it is, more about the underlying systems, and at least in my experience, technical debt is usually something that is a barrier for developers more so than users.
Mm-hmm.
Again, like performance issues notwithstanding. But whenever I kind of join in discussions about technical debt, it's usually about developers' time being more precious and allowing a system to grow. And design debt is, to me, much more wrapped up in how the actual model, how the actual like information of a system is modeled, and how a user builds, like, has a mental model of how something works and how that interfaces with how the thing actually works.
Hmm. Yeah, that makes sense to me. So how do we, or maybe I should start with, what's our goal of trying to mind map design debt?
Yeah. My goal out of this is somebody in chat said, but agile.
Yeah, I know. I love the comments. Keep them coming. I
Oh
was
my
just
goodness.
checking those out.
Yeah, I hadn't glanced at it because I was just rambling, but yeah, that's agile. It's like that, that aliens meme with the guy on History Channel with the crazy hair. It's aliens.
Oh
It's
yeah,
like
yeah, yeah.
agile. um Anyway, to your question, my goal out of this is I I want a really solid understanding of design debt for myself so that I can sort of sell it to businesses or stakeholders more confidently, and yeah, more confidently, I guess. There's so much wrapped up in design debt, and uh, especially in the last few years that I've been at thoughtbot, I'm thinking more about design in terms of uh, how businesses and decision makers think about design and what their perceptions are about design,
Mhm.
so that I can either challenge or reinforce those and really get to the bottom line of, what is your business reason for investing in design. We
Mhm.
wouldn't design nice things and do design thinking and do jobs to be done if it didn't make businesses better and it didn't make products better.
Mhm.
um,
Absolutely. And I think from my conversation, actually, I'm gonna move into a place with a little more light because I'm looking a little dark over here. Um, but I'm hearing the same thing from most of the conversations I have too, which is how can how can we better sell the value of design work to business stakeholders? I think it's a really common challenge that designers, that companies have in seeing the payoff, like the ROI of investing in these things. And it's not just for the sake of doing them. It's not just altruistic. It is to help the business be more successful, to help the product be more successful.
mhm.
So I love that.
Yeah, so I'm just going to go ahead and add, uh, the business of design, because I think it has to it has to always come back to, yeah, how is it improving the business. We don't just want to make it beautiful or make it work because that's nice and it looks good in my portfolio or anything like that. I want that too, of course, but really at the end of the day, it has to be something that we can put some numbers on and say, okay, by spending 2 weeks in a design process, in a shaping process, maybe doing a design sprint, we are going to see an impact either in, number of customers that you have, sales that you're making. The project that I'm working on right now, the metric is reducing calls to customer service, and that's a really interesting one because it's it's like a very concrete metric.
Yeah.
uh, Number of calls coming into customer support, or number of emails coming to support.
So would that be something interesting to try to list out, is maybe some of those concrete uh, business impact areas.
Mm-hmm.
I think the customer support one is a great example.
Yeah, if your product is easy to use, then you're not going to have as many people complaining to you that they don't know where X, Y, and Z is.
Mm-hmm. I think another one, kind of the opposite side, is increased engagement. Is a metric that a lot of product teams are working towards.
Mm-hmm. How do you quantify that? Is it just looking at I mean, I can imagine for like a customer or consumer product, you're thinking of time spent, or you have some other indicators of engagement and how you measure that.
Mm-hmm. I think a common one is to kind of identify valuable actions in the product, in the platform, that you want people to take, um, and then measuring how often that is happening.
Mm-hmm.
And one that comes to mind for me on a product I used to work on, one of the key actions that we kept a really close eye on was, it was a collaboration software. And one of the key actions metrics we followed was how many times someone invited someone else to collaborate with them.
Mm.
Because that also is like a virality component too. So they're exposing new people to the product. So that was like a number one metric for us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Frequency of invitations to collaborate. Yeah, I like to get away from the examples of just like shopping cart checkout stuff, because that one feels like such an easy example to to kind of fall back on, and that's why I think this one is pretty interesting, because it uh, even though I don't know what project that was, I can guess at what type of thing it is.
Right.
Yeah, that's interesting.
I mean, another one was just like created a new project. So it would be almost like, maybe if, even you're thinking about like a Miro, is this, a similar thing, are you sharing this design mind map with someone else, inviting them into the platform? And then, how many new projects or templates or whatever the nomenclature is there, how many are you starting?
Mm-hmm.
And there's usually some hypothesis or intelligence behind that. The more data that you collect, so like we can, based on the history of this product, we know that if someone creates 10 projects and invites 5 people, that they're not going to churn. So there's also like this relationship to retention.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's kind of like the stem of all of these other things you would be measuring. Let's see. Function over form. This is a question from the chat. I definitely am a strong believer that design starts with function, especially in the especially in product design. The ultimate the ultimate question is whether or not it's really meeting the need, and anything that follows in terms of how it looks or the branding or anything like that is pretty superficial. It's a gradient because there
Mm.
are some forms that impact. There are some seemingly superficial forms that impact function, but uh,
Like brand.
yeah, like you want to have some level of form because it's like an indicator that care has been taken with the function. It's like you see somebody walking down the street. I don't know if I really want to use this analogy. I'm just gonna
Uh-oh.
say it. You see somebody walking down
Live
the street.
TV.
Yeah, I'll just say it. I don't think it's bad. You see somebody walking down the street if they have put attention into how they look, like they are, you know, clean and well dressed. Um, it's not always true, and you shouldn't judge a book by its cover, but you do get some indication that they like maybe have it more together if they're presenting themselves in a way that's like confident, they're putting their best foot forward, versus the opposite. So in some ways form does kind of impact, if not the actual function, the perception, and that certainly does tie into to the business side.
Hmm.
I might be able to solve my problem with an Excel spreadsheet, um, but I may reach for something that is a little bit more tailored to my exact need. And if it looks nice and I can understand it, then there is some psychology there. And um, somebody may convince me to pay $5 a month for something that I could do in an Excel spreadsheet
Yeah,
for free.
I get that. I don't know if this is because I'm work in product or if it's like everyone feels the same way, but I'm such a sucker for like a slick onboarding process. I'm like, oh, this is nice. I'm into this. And I'm like already referring people to use it, even though I haven't really gotten into the product.
Mm-hmm.
So those like those first impressions, like um, they do make a difference for sure.
Yeah, yeah, I agree 100%. And um, like I think that there is a growing interest in software that does really products that do one thing well. And even though I could manage my entire life in a complicated spreadsheet, it provides a bit more focus to be able to reach for a specific tool, rather than a Swiss Army knife every time.
Mm.
There is an actual cognitive impact, and design plays a really big a really big role in that, because we aren't perfect in terms of focus and in terms of understanding the capabilities of what's in front of us, or all of the options that we have in front of us. And
Hmm.
sometimes a good tool can make those things more obvious for us.
Yeah, and when you're talking about that, it also brings to mind user testing for me. Um, and the fact that I think a lot of pitfall product teams can fall into is not doing enough user testing and assuming that the options or that flow is intuitive, um, when in fact you get it in front of someone who's completely new to it and they don't understand, what they're supposed to be clicking on or how this is even helping, the problem that they're working on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so, for example, the project that I'm working on right now has a lot of that going on where it's just not obvious enough what all of the tools are. Um,
Mm,
so a lot of the burden that's falling on customer success is really just pointing out that something is available.
yeah.
And
Yep.
design can alleviate a lot of that for sure. Is there a standard file type for mind maps? I don't think so. Maybe you could invent, if it's not already a well-known standard, a .mm extension. Invent one. Uh,
Yeah, for those who don't know or missed it at the top, we are using Miro for this, and they actually have a mind map template, so we just grabbed that and are going with the flow here.
yeah. Hmm. Yeah, the other thing that kind of ties into like the like the perception of something that's well designed is that there is definitely a benefit to a certain degree with following a trend. And this is something that I think is, a little bit unfortunate because it does reinforce some cognitive biases, I think, that we all have, of course. But if a tool, like you said, slick, like you like a slick onboarding experience, and that's definitely something that is it is designed and engineered to look that way. And even if it functioned exactly the same but didn't follow like the standard design trend, or it wasn't really in the ballpark of that world, then you might think that it isn't slick. Um,
Mm-hmm. That's true. Oh my gosh, I'm being fooled.
I think the it really comes down to the function though. Like there was something, this was a while ago, but someone in our design channel shared a, like a website that had been designed like early 2000s or something like that, and was looking at it like, oh man, remember when the web used to look like this? Like, I'm so glad that we moved away from this. And I was looking at it and I was like, I don't know, like the page is responsive. There's a clear hierarchy of information.
Mm,
The menu is well organized. Basically everything on top of that is just, an aesthetic. But they're the read of it is like, oh, this is from like 10 years ago. It's probably broken.
right. Was it spacejam.com?
That's right. Yes, it was spacejam.com. No. That is a beautiful website. Um, I wish that I could make products that just look like that.
Um, so that also reminds me, another part of design that we haven't touched on is accessibility.
Mm,
Thinking about those, kind of more static text-based websites that actually were easier to use and read and load. Um, and sometimes the new design trends that are kind of splashy and highly animated are taking up a lot of load time for one, and can also be uh, hard to use with a screen reader, or are giving people headaches because they're like so animated and things like that.
yeah.
um,
Yeah, that's a huge problem. Uh, Especially I'm thinking about the sort of the overuse and abuse of animation, especially when it's not progressive. Like there's no way to really get the information unless you're looking at this page with like, a paragraph of text on top of a video background.
mm,
And that that's always kind of disheartening to me. I have the reduce motion on my operating system set on, so I whenever I see a lot of motion on a web page, I'm disheartened because there's obviously just no real thought into how is this going to what is this experience going to be like for somebody with like a vestibular disorder or like severe motion sickness or something like that.
Hmm.
And design debt in particular is something that we're saying like we can put this off. Like that's what the idea of debt is like we're going to pay this in the future, and that's a really that's a pretty backwards idea to have around accessibility. Like accessibility should never really come under design debt. It does, unfortunately, but like some debt is good. Like if we can get a product out there and it works great, it's accessible, then we can mortgage some of our design and pay that down in the future when we have a bigger team. We can make it look nicer. We can invest more into the onboarding experience. But mortgaging accessibility is really just saying like we don't have the capability or want really to make something accessible and usable by everyone, and that's pretty unfortunate because it's really not, it shouldn't be that hard
Hmm.
because like you said, like websites from the past mostly text, not a lot of single page apps 10 years ago. Those were a lot more accessible out of the box.
So in a way, it's easier.
Yeah, it's, I mean, it's easier to make something accessible if you, yeah, if you're following more of like the web standard than, going into this land of essentially like a fully fledged app inside of a browser. But that's just kind of the nature of it. Like things are moving more towards being in the browser, and like desktop software, I don't have a lot of experience with what accessibility is like for like
Hmm.
native software. um but this is a whole big uh can of worms as well because of how the technology has grown.
Hmm. Have you had, speaking about like making a pitch to the business to invest in design debt, have you been in a situation where you pitched taking on more accessibility related projects?
Yeah. The space that this project is in right now, their main product, I guess you could say. Yeah, I'm just going to refer to it like that. Like their main product has a lot of design debt, and certainly a lot of it is entangled with accessibility, and a lack of accessibility. And the way that we're trying to push it now is to kind of simplify it and move it away from these complex sort of like dashboard interfaces back to a pretty standard web app experience where you have one page per task. So like if you're filling out a form for creating a new user or something, we're going to give you a specific page for that rather than showing you a table and having like inline forms and updating things asynchronously. And that allows us to add new features that are accessible while also tackling some of the accessibility in the core application. But yeah, the accessibility is part of a conversation for each new feature that we're adding to make sure that we're, you know, simplifying in order to make it more accessible out of the box.
Hmm. Yeah, that's what I've heard, or my understanding is the best way to work on accessibility is not necessarily to be like, here's our Q1 accessibility project. We did it, but think about forward looking all projects that are going on. How is accessibility constantly weaved into all the design and development of all features that go out?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's something that I'm pretty. Uh, I don't have a lot of accessibility education or experience. I feel like I've hit like maybe the lowest bar for just like, does this have the right accessibility roles on the elements? Is the HTML semantic? Just to hit like the lowest bar for like a screen reader or a keyboard user. And yeah, this is definitely something that I want to focus more on, because I am starting to run into a lot more cases now where we pretty much have to build some kind of quasi single page app. There is some asynchronous like page state management, and I just don't know what the accessibility coverage is for something like that.
Hmm.
So we're kind of reaching the limits of like I'm reaching the limits of my knowledge for trying to keep things simple. Some things kind of have to be complex, or else you're putting a lot of unnecessary burden on the user to figure it out. And yeah, it's something that, and I mean, this is true of design and managing a code base from a technical side as well. You can't just have a guide and trust that it's always going to be followed. It requires a lot of vigilance from everybody on the team. Um, like I can take a design system and make, like put together the pieces and make something that looks like it does not fit the design system at all.
That's a fun game. That's a totally different live stream.
Yeah.
Let's give you a design system and see what you can come up with that wouldn't fit that design system whatsoever.
Yeah, yeah.
It's the
That's
next episode.
Yeah, I would love to do that one actually, because I have kind of been interested in like design systems, and whether like I don't know, I've had this idea stuck in my head for a while, like, design systems, do we really need them? And I feel like it would be
Whoa,
good to just
hot take.
get it out there, because I feel like it's kind of invading my brain at this point.
That's
And
great.
I I definitely think that there are benefits, and this was an interesting thing that came up when we were, talking about design debt, and also that you mentioned in your write up is like, a design system. Do you have a design system, and is it being followed? And that's part of the vigilance of
Yeah, where's
making
that go in the
sure.
mind map?
Yeah, I don't know. I think that's maybe like a parent idea. Hello. Um, my map can later be exported as an image or PDF. That's cool. Board can also be embedded elsewhere, like in
Yeah, we've
Confluence.
got some Miro representatives on the call to support, and we love it.
This is great. Um, Thank you for sharing that. I didn't know that these could be embedded, and I am using Confluence for a lot of projects right now, and I've just been kind of like wrangling tables to do a lot of this. So maybe I'll explore embedding some different
Oh, neat.
Miro docs to make things a little bit more fun.
So I'm sorry, I cut you off when
Hmm?
you were on a good roll about design systems.
Oh, no, that's all I wanted to say. Design systems, do we really need them? Um, I don't know. I've seen some design systems that have. I guess what I should say is like I think that a lot of small teams start thinking about them maybe before it's really necessary.
Hmm.
Certainly when you have like multiple designers and want to have like consistency across multiple products, or you have like a native app and a web app, and those things need to have kind of like a single source of truth.
Hmm.
It can make a lot of sense, but again, this comes back to like the business idea or the business of design. What is the concrete impact uh, on the business for maintaining a design system? Because it's essentially, a uh, very detailed piece of documentation that sort of needs to be like a source of truth. It needs to be updated and be maintained and be followed. And I'm sure that you could look at the business impact of that in some cases and say, it's not worth it. It's not actually it's costing us a lot of designer time to keep this up to date, and it's not necessarily translating into like better customer retention. They don't care if like the
Hmm.
spacing of our buttons is always exactly 8 pixels, that kind of thing.
When is a good time to introduce the design system, do you think?
uh, that's tough. um, I don't know if I have a good answer to that. The immediate thing that my brain went to was really more about team size,
Hmm.
because I think there is a point at which your design team could be so big that it's actually counterproductive to kind of have these different teams that are all trying to like push in different directions. They do need a single uh, source of truth to like collaborate on and align on a vision, so that the the paradigms that they're using from one part of an app to another, or from one app to another, are consistent. But if your design team is like 3 people and they share a design vision and they're talking every single day, then you may not need it. So maybe
Hmm.
that's the answer. Maybe it's if you have multiple small teams of designers and they're not talking every single day. Maybe that's when you need a design system.
Hmm. What if all the designers quit?
Yeah, that's that's a great point.
To play design devil's advocate.
Yeah, that's a fabulous point. And again, I think like if you have uh, like 3 designers, let's say, and they're all talking every single day, there's going to be some kind of there's going to be some kind of documentation, right? Like and maybe that's where I'm making a an assumption, um, because I think like a design system is quite large and expensive in my mind. Like that's kind of when it becomes a design system,
Hmm.
when you're like cataloging, multiple possibilities and trying to kind of get into every little nook and cranny. Whereas, if 3 designers are working on a project and talking every single day, they're creating their own sort of documentation and language, and that's manifesting both in the product and also maybe in like some other areas. Like I have a Figma file for what I'm working on right now. I wouldn't necessarily call it a design system. um, but
Hmm.
it's like a manifestation of that design system. So if another designer looked at it, I think, if they have even a little bit of experience, I think they would look at it and start to see some of the patterns.
Yeah,
And
that's really interesting.
it might
I
not
wonder
be.
if
Go ahead, go ahead.
No, I'm just wondering if someone else might see your Figma and think it is a design system.
Maybe.
Is it, yeah, you're not like categorizing things specifically.
Yeah, I think I like the components are there, but the documentation isn't, perhaps.
Got it.
And that's more of a that's more of a side effect of just the speed at which we're moving and the fact that I'm the only designer on the project. So if somebody else was going to come onto the project, I don't think it would necessarily be like another designer was going to take my place. I don't think it would necessarily be of a great benefit for them if I wrote down everything that's in my head as documentation for everything that's going on there. Um, One, because the cost of me doing that is really high, to the not necessarily just for me, but for the business. Like if I have to suddenly spend half my time like documenting what I'm doing very in a
Hmm.
very detailed way, then we can't move as fast. And it's like if they're hiring another designer because I'm just very detailed, uh, documenting everything I'm doing in very much detail, then it's like an equation that balances itself out.
Yeah, that makes sense, especially with client work where, you're trying to provide as much value during a set time frame to that client and balancing, what is the most valuable thing.
Yeah.
It well, everything you're saying about design systems, it reminds me too of like brand guidelines on the marketing side. Um, because I think, you can have a tendency to be like, well, all these things about the brand and our, voice and tone and how we use the logos, those should be obvious, right? But then, if you let someone kind of run with it very quickly, it can turn out to be like, oh wait, no, there were like rules in my head that aren't translating to other people.
Yeah.
So it can be a fine line.
Yeah. And I think, coming back to this idea of like I can take a design system and make something. I'm pretty confident in my ability here. I could take a design system and make something that looks like it does not belong in the product that that design system is for. And again, that comes down to like, yeah, those unwritten rules. You know, you
Hmm.
really can't document everything. So the design system is meant to really just provide that essence, I guess. Like, I mean, it's kind of similar to like how thoughtbot approaches our handbook. Like it's very detailed, and to an extent our playbook too. Like it's very detailed in certain areas, and then from that you can infer what the approach would be in other
Hmm.
situations, unknown situations.
Hmm. All right, so I've got another design debt we haven't touched on yet,
Okay.
which is, and see if you agree or disagree. But user research getting put in the icebox on the permanent backlog, not getting done enough. What do you think?
Yeah. um I see it happen all the time. This is something that every designer knows they need. um Personally, always I always struggle to like get in front of users. One, because I'm rather introverted, but uh, two, because some of the problems that I end up solving or really trying to solve. What am I trying to say? Like, I guess what I'm saying is like I end up getting stuck playing telephone a lot of times, where like there'll be somebody in a role who wants to talk to the customer directly and doesn't want to invite other people into the room.
Mm.
I think that this can happen sometimes in businesses that are very driven by sales teams.
Hmm. Yeah, especially if it's like enterprise. So if you have like large clients and there's a specific person who owns that relationship, it can be tough for other people to get access.
Mm-hmm.
Is
Yeah.
that what you're thinking of, or a different scenario?
No, that's pretty much it. Uh, Hitting the nail on the head. Um, but but yeah, more broadly, yeah, user testing. This is something that we try and do in the design sprint. We want to do this really early, and especially if you're kind of operating on a hunch, like this is my business. Like if you're in a greenfield product, um, you have an assumption or a hunch that like this is something that people want, and that's where it can be very the the impact can be much greater earlier on in the project because again you have this we all have this cognitive bias of like the sunk cost fallacy. So if you start going down one road and then you find out your assumption is wrong, it's harder to course correct. And
Hmm.
that's why I think a lot of uh, certainly this is why a lot of startups have a hard time because uh, they they fall into this cognitive bias, and it's harder to pivot. And of course there are a lot of other things tangled up in that too, but really understanding what somebody needs out of your tool or whatever you're making pretty much is the crux of the business, right? Like you wouldn't
Hmm.
have a product or a business if there wasn't somebody who was willing to give you some money for it.
Yeah. Or you find out they don't need it, and that's great too. Go figure out what they do need
Yeah,
and build that.
yeah, that's another huge thing I think that plays into like the sunk cost fallacy is if you put off doing user testing, then and you find out when you've already put in quite a bit of effort into even like not just prototyping but like making a product or a service or
Hmm.
something, and then find out that people are easily filling their need with some other tool and your thing just it doesn't have market fit, then it can be a real blow, um, not just to the amount of time that you've spent working on it, but like to the ego as well. I think to say like, well,
Hmm.
I'm gonna just cut my losses here and move on and focus on something else. And certainly, I've been part of design sprints where we uh, come to the conclusion that there's really not a market fit.
I was gonna ask. So, what happens? How difficult is that conversation?
Um, it certainly varies with different people's personalities. Some people will come into a design sprint absolutely convinced that people want the thing that they're going to make, and almost nothing can change their mind.
Hmm.
And I think that can happen a lot when the idea for the product is like, uh, you know, related to a field that they're already in. So like they see a need, they hear a lot from people, and maybe they also are playing into like their confirmation bias. Um,
Yeah.
and kind of like cherry picking some experiences, but they can kind of convince themselves that they're an expert in that field, and they see a need and think like, well, obviously there's a need here, so people will pay for it. And I was reading something recently. I forget if it was on our blog or not, but this story about somebody
Hopefully.
saying like, uh, I had this idea for something, and everybody who I talked to wanted it, and everybody who I talked to said, "Oh, this is such a cool idea." So I quit my job. I spent 2 years trying to build it, and then I actually go and try and like sell it to people, and they're like, I would use this for free, but I'm not gonna pay you every month to use it. Certainly not." And that ended up being the story of having to kind of swallow a hard pill, which is spending a few years building something and basing it solely on the feedback of people saying, yes, this is cool, you should build this, I would use this, but not doing the user research to find out if people would actually pay for it.
Mm-hmm. And then you have a classic, going back to using this word debt, compound debt issue. The longer you're going and the more you're building in the wrong direction, the more it's going to cost you.
Yeah. User testing, that should be an early step. I mean, it's got to be something that you're doing consistently throughout the whole process. There should be the tighter the feedback loop, the better. But you need to be doing it early, and it's kind of like an equation that you balance. I don't like to think of it in terms of like a linear flow. Like, you do user testing, if that gets a check mark, you do a prototype, check mark, launch first product in beta, check mark. I want to think of it more in terms of balancing, like, what is the risk of doing too little user testing up front, and how much do we need to build to get to a viable product. Because if I have this differentiator, like I have access to a bunch of information that people want and not many people do, and I can just very easily create something over a weekend, like hack together something over a weekend and put it in people's hands, I don't really need to do user testing at that point, because I can spend a weekend to just verify my hunch and gather real world data uh, about, are people actually coming to the page, are people hitting the buy button or the subscribe button or whatever, with very little cost. But if it's going to take me 2 months to build a product, but if it comes together just the way that I'm envisioning it, it'll be a blockbuster or something. That's a pretty heavy investment. That's a pretty big hunch.
That's high risk.
That's high risk, yeah. So it depends a lot on, I think, what really you need out of that initial like whatever you can release as alpha or beta.
Cool. Well, we're coming up on the hour here. I think we hit on most of the design debt topics that we wanted to at least touch. Obviously, all of these, you said earlier, each of these are, their own can of worms. Was there anything else you wanted to chat about before we wrap up?
I don't think so. We hit a lot of good points here.
Does anyone in the audience have anything to share or questions? Thank you for joining our little live YouTube experiment. I think there's a little delay, so I'm gonna wait and see.
Yeah.
Or just like share your favorite emoji in the chat.
Yeah. Yeah, so I'm looking forward to doing some more streams. Thank you for being a guest and co-host.
Yeah, this was a lot of fun. Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to you doing more streams too.
Yeah. I would love to do. I think we pointed out that either accessibility or maybe a stream on design systems would be interesting. So I'll definitely ask you if you want to
Yeah,
come back and talk about either of those as well.
I do. So, sorry, I should have been more coy. Played harder to get.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you can pencil me in.
Yeah. We should have bring on someone who's like really passionate about design systems, and then
And I'll
you try to
debate them.
debunk. Yeah, and then you debate them. That's good.
Yeah, I
All
will.
right, there's some great emojis in the chat. Thanks, y'all.
I see. I already had a hunch that this was Elena's favorite emoji.
Yes. Oh,
Oh man,
game
we need to get a
controller,
moderator.
puppy.
Maybe I should delay chat.
No one answered that question. All right, cool. This is fun.
All right. Thanks a lot, Lindsay. And
All right.
thank you, everybody who tuned in.
Yeah. Bye, y'all.
See you next time.
Oh God, it's getting chaotic in there. I'm leaving.
I'm glad they waited until the end of the stream.